Well, hello, this is Dr. Chris Lemmon again. We're looking at September teaching. I have been doing a continuation on the concept of teaching. First, just the idea of the whole view of teaching, and now we've kind of got into teachers. So last time I did a rather long-winded thing about, what the stylistic pieces and some of the protocols and being able to teach concepts, which is a little different than teaching mathematics or English or something that's totally in the structured world. When we integrate structure and phenomena, the whole game starts to change. So we're getting into the world of, I'm sure, what a physicist comes up with. They sit around and have crazy ideas that everybody looks at them and thinks they're nuts, but then they implement that and start to dig up some support for it, some mathematics, some relative associated piece of data that might give it a somewhat credibility. And a way that science works is they get then funding to pay for it, and it all comes together. And now today, depending who gets the funding and who published it and who's behind it, has a little bit more weight than maybe the material does. And I'm starting out with this aspect because I'm saying that you might be involved in learning or teaching, and someone might look at it and say, that's all hokey stuff. You should go to a college and learn what it's really about. Okay, I've been to a college, I got a degree. I will give you some of that information later on, right? It's just that they want to limit it back for the same reason that being a racist or having women be handicapped in some way, shape, or form. We all have heard stories. My mother, when the war was on, she went to work in Hanover Shoe Company, running a machine, stamping out dyes for shoe leather to assemble shoes. And she was getting paid less than a man doing the same job. And nobody even questioned that because that was the standard at the time. Now, today, it's a big deal. I'm saying we have come a long ways, you guys. We look out today and we look at discernment and we say, oh, that's not fair. But in the days in the past, that wasn't fair because men had an advantage over women. That wasn't fair because whites had an advantage over blacks or Asians. That wasn't fair because rich people had a little bit of advantage over poor people. Well, or that all those things, that idea of a separation between levels starts at the bottom and starts to take away look, when we went into this present meme at around 1950, we reached majority intent. Around 1970, we started looking at rights for women, a big change in all those components, rights for minority, a big change. I can remember when I was 9 years old and I was coming through one of the southern states, Georgia, Mississippi, one of those, and my parents would stop in a car so I could get out and run around and play because I'm a little kid and I get tired of sitting. So it's nice to have me run around. And I went to get a drink of water. And my mother had to grab me and say, don't use that fountain. I just could not believe that there's a water fountain that said colored on it. I didn't pay attention to that. And I was going to get a drink of water. My mother said, you can't do that because we'll get in trouble. It's like, I didn't know where to put that. I grew up in a German community. They were all Germans. I saw one person of color growing up, and I asked my grandmother why that guy had dark skin. I talked to him. He was really nice. He was somewhere homeless or worker or what, I don't know, but he was fairly clean cut. He was very polite. I talked to him, very interesting. And she said, I said, why is that skin dark skin? And she said, God just left him in the oven a little longer. He's the same as all the rest of us. And that was the only philosophy I had to work with at age 5. So I didn't get the lesson. Because it wasn't there to teach. I'm not saying that my grandmother was an advanced person. She was a German. She hated Catholics like a passion. So She had her own racism. She's like, um, when my mother dated a Catholic, she was just torn. Really, it's kind of like that was the worst thing my mother could have done, unless she had eventually married one. It's like, holy cow. Um, you see, this is the nature of us. We like to find similarity, and then we connect on similarity, and we think that has value. Well, it doesn't have, well, it might have value or it might not have value. I can't make that statement because it would be my opinion, not your opinion. But for the most part, when you start to look at that, it's because it's easy to adapt to familiar. If we all do the same thing, it's simple. I don't have to. It's because of our lack of attention. It allows us to be lazier. It allows us not to see the difference. Yeah. And it's just amazing to me that it has taken so long for us to find the value in a person and not the value in their club or their culture or all the above, or the political connection or what. The good news is we moved up the scale. Are we still racist? Yeah, we can always find that no matter what. We can always find a difference of opinion no matter what. Is it as bad as it was in the 40s? No, it's not as bad, right? It's just, it is not. And I've been to, I don't know how many of those support groups that I went down to help a community of minority people. And I'm down there saying, hey, I'm lucky I never got shot or arrested. I was in school and college, and we would go down on weekends to the South or some crazy place, or even San Francisco, and kind of be of assistance to support people that are trying to get their rights, whether it's a women's group or a gay group or a people of color or Asian minority groups. So I can remember when I was in San Francisco in the 80s, when all of a sudden AIDS became an issue. And the first thing I did living there was like, I didn't say, oh my God, what am I going to do? I went down to a clinic and volunteered my time. It's like, hey, this is a problem. I better get more information about it. The secret is that statement right there. I wasn't going to run from something because I didn't understand it. I needed to get into it more so I could learn the difference. And that's what we're going to talk about. So behind the scenes on everything I told you in our last talk of teaching a teacher, what the subset is and what teachers struggle with trying to learn is this one piece of concept. And because it's an unconscious piece, it never seems to come up in memory. You're never able to log it into like, oh, I remember that. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, 90 some degrees out today. I got a short sleeve shirt on. I'm drinking some club soda and ice, trying to cool out because my computer and my phone, all my gear is out of my shop. I don't have any electronic stuff in my house. It's not because I'm intimidated by the EMF, but I'm trying to be able to reduce the effect. I don't think I can get away from the effect because I can't imagine anybody in a neighborhood not having a computer. So 20 feet next to my house is going to be another house with, I'm not going to get out of the effect of it. Power lines are one block over, blah, 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 right? So it's kind of like, I'm not fearful. I just want a little buffer. I'm advocating that when you start to notice the difference, make a little buffer, not because you're afraid, not because you want to be safe. Oh my goodness. Or it's like, no, don't lock yourself in a bunker. Make a little bit of difference so that you have a room for discernment. Don't step in the fire. If you're cold, you come close to a fire. If you get warm, you step back from a fire. You don't ever need to jump in the fire, right? Yes, I know I've talked about firewalk. That's a little different, but during the open flames, while we're all dancing around, we're staying away from the fire until it calms down to coals. And we're hyping ourselves up to be able to had the experience of the phenomenon in our body. Those are the buffer zones I'm looking for. So do I think we should worry about something? Do I think we should rush out and do something? You know, if it's a concern to you, give it a little time, give it a little break, and then take some action. Whatever you do, if it's a decision, you looked at all the facts and you made a decision. Bless you, go for it. That's it. I'm not going to talk you out. I'm not going to talk you into it. Just do it, right? I'm not an adversary for anything. I am an adversary for human potential. I think you could do more with your life. I really do. And I think I could do more. So I'm going to start with a story and then how I noticed something and was able over the years to start to put it together and start to be able to utilize that in my thinking, even though when I tell people, they don't seem to, it doesn't come into a cognitive balancing piece. Okay, let me start out. I'm about age 5 or 6, little tyke, right? Kind of a skinny little kid. I wasn't a healthy kid. So I played in the basement a lot in Pennsylvania. It was nice. I had all my toys laid out. I didn't put them away. I just went down and played. It was kind of cool. I didn't get outside and play with the other kids as much as everyone else because I was a little skinny. I was a little limpy. I had allergic reactions to things. I was a mess. I was just a total mess, right? And I had a wonderful family that were very caring and went to great lengths to take care of me. So it was all a blessing. It all worked out really, really good, right? So here I am, 5, 6 years old. My aunt gets married. Well, she'd been married several times. Most of her marriages lasted maybe a week or two. Obviously, she had some issues and problems. I could define it down to kind of drinking, but yeah, whatever. And anyway, here she got married and had a baby. That was kind of cool. So I had a cousin. All right, wow, that's kind of neat. So I'm sitting there as a kid, and my grandmother is changing the diapers on this little baby because now that my aunt has got a child, she's no longer has the husband because they didn't last very long, but at least she has the child and she has to go out and work to pay for whatever. So everybody's living, there were very, very few single family in the 40s. Like there was very, very few single family dwellings. You couldn't get a house. You lived with family because there was no houses to go get. Couldn't even find apartments. So there was 40-50% of the people lived with other people. And so here we were living in our house together. Grandma was a sweetheart. And so she took care of me while my mother worked. She took care of my cousin while her mother worked, right? And so that's it. I'm watching my grandmother change diapers. My grandmother was, I thought of her as being old because I was 5 or 6. So if she would have been 40, I would have thought of her as being old, right? So anyway, I thought her as being old. I watched her change diapers. In those days, we put pins in diapers, right? And I watched her nail that poor little girl with the edge of a pin on the right side. As she's putting it on, the little girl jumped, and of course, my grandmother stopped and she kind of babied her a little bit and said, it's okay, and then she fixed it and put it on and made sure there was no bleeding, there was no nothing. It was like not a big deal, I have raised kids back in the days of diaper pins, and I have stuck a few kids in my day. So it's like, I got it. And I'm sure it probably happened to me. So not a big thing. But I observed this. And for some reason, it registered somewhere up here. It's like, that was kind of strange. Well, my grandmother would maybe change her diaper or bathe her or something, and she'd have her in a little bassinet, and she would say, hey, watch the baby while I go take the diaper out. You had to go rinse them out and then wash them and blah, blah, blah in those days because we didn't have throwaways. Or you had to go out and dump the wash water outside in the yard somewhere and clean the bucket out and come back in and dress the baby. So I'm playing with the baby to entertain this kid, till my grandmother gets back. And I touch her. I just touch her and she just kind of giggles and she bats her hand at it. And we're playing, right? I'm sure she's interpreting as play. I touch her cheek and she giggles, and I touch her chest, she just giggles. And I touch her leg, I grab her finger, whatever. We're just having fun. We're playing. I notice if I touch her on the right side by her hip, she just giggles. If I touch her on the left side, where the day before she got nailed with a pin, her stomach pulls back in and she doesn't giggle. And I go, wow, that is weird. And I know what happened. I thought, that's kind of interesting. So I just play a little bit. And then before grandma gets back, I touch her one more time on the left side. And she does the same thing. She doesn't giggle. She pulls back in with her stomach. She doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. There's no alarm. She just goes to what I'd call a defensive move. Now, I know I can't ask grandma. Barely, come on, in the 40s, kids weren't expected to ask questions. And most of the time, adults would say, it's either God's will or you're too young to understand. Two pat questions you get. Nothing else would count. So I can't ask her. But it's registering up here. I'm really wanting to know what that is, what happened, and do I have reactions like that? Right? So that's where I say, a year goes by. During the course of the year, when I get an opportunity and no one was around, I'd touch that little girl on the right hip, giggle, play. I'd touch her on the left hip. That reaction was in there. It reduced a little bit, but it was still in there. I could still see it, a little delayed, still in there, not as strong, but still there. I really wanted to know what that was. Somewhere around age 8, I think, or so, I used to be the doctor would come to the house. In those days, doctors came to your house, right? I don't think he had an office anywhere. We had a little hole in the wall place downtown that was called a hospital, Hanover General Hospital, whatever. And then we had another hospital, which was a Catholic hospital, right? Because of the conflict I already mentioned between the religions, right? So the doctor comes in, and I thought, how friendly. He's coming by because he's social. I didn't know, and they didn't tell kids. My grandmother had a tumor. It was cancerous. They couldn't do anything for it. So the doctor was come by maybe every couple of weeks to check on her to make sure she wasn't in pain, blah, 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 blah. And I never got told. So I just assumed he was social, friendly. So I did. I asked him. I said, I notice that my cousin has a reaction when you touch here, when you touch there. I don't tell him about the pin because I feel like I could get my grandmother in trouble or some silliness like that. I'm just a kid, right? So he said, nah. So I get the whole lecture on, with a hammer, you hit your knee when you come in for an exam, and babies have reactions, blah, 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 and then they fade. So that's probably a blah, 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 blah. And I'm sitting there looking at him, and I really want to say, okay, you have a rehearsed answer for me, but that's not filling the blanks in here. I really want to know what's going on. And I can see this guy he was a doctor. He worked with people. He could read people, right? In other words, he could see what temper, what mood you're in, so on and so forth. He had to know that, right? Because he was working on people. He had to know what your health state was. So he's looking at me and he realized he didn't make connection. So he said, let me tell you this. Sometimes I do surgery. People get an appendicitis. So they come in and I have to knock them out. You were put out because they worked on your tonsils. So you understand what that is. So I went ahead and I would knock them out. When I would be operating, I would go in He didn't say cut. When I go in, I would find the infected material inside that I had to remove so the person lives from the appendicitis. It busted and it was infecting the body. I had to clean it out and remove that. And when I do that, literally that would move away from me like it was trying to escape. It just move a little bit. So that's something that you see sometimes in life. And I thought, okay, now I'm getting to a real answer. That's a reaction that's in there. I don't know very much about it yet, but I'm not going to abandon this. I'm not quite going to let this go. Come on, I'm just, 8, 9 years old, whatever. But and no one to talk to. And I'm not sure, other than a doctor, anybody I would have talked to would have just told me, don't worry about it, or it's not your business, or whatever they would have been some. Do you see what I'm modeling? I'm modeling this like the way that they treated kids in those days is the way that we now see how big companies maybe treat people, override people, how people in control can manipulate things. We think that's new. We think that's, but in there was a real experience to me. I realized I had no one to talk to find information for something. I couldn't ask a question about an observation. And I know I've been lied to. I had a little toy when I was a kid that somebody bought me, and you press a button, it was a ray gun, right? Because I think it was the Flash Gordon thing, and it wasn't on TV. We didn't have TV yet. It was on the radio, right? So I pressed the button, and a ray gun made a noise, and the lights would blink. It's kind of cool. So in the dark, it was cool. In the dark, you could go and you could point the gun at something and press a button, and lights would flicker, and it would make a noise. And I had it for a couple of weeks, and it disappeared. I couldn't figure out what happened to it. I didn't have to think about it very long, where I realized it made a noise. My grandmother didn't appreciate the noise. So when I was sleeping, she took that thing and trashed it, but never owned up to it. And so here I'm sitting thinking, hey, I've been conspired against, right? So I really got to be careful with this lady, because if I come up with any piece of wisdom, I might have a pillow over my head or something. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? I didn't know the context of it because we didn't. There was no way to inform. The matrix in there goes to defense automatically. That little girl was going to defense automatically. I started to get this, but I was chewing on it, right? Well, you grow up, you get older. I got involved in engineering. I got involved in design. I got into engineering in college. I got into blah, 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 blah. And I started looking at, like, where does the difference sit? So here I'm living someplace with a bunch of guys going to school. We have a gate that locks when you go in and out of the backyard. When we go down to the car, we have to lock and unlock the gate. And the gate was a real pain in the ass because there's 4 of us living in a house. When I rented the place, I had to get 4 keys made. So we all had keys, and the keys would never quite work. You had to go back to the shop a couple times, and then finally, after living there for a few months, all of a sudden my key wasn't working, and it's just like, okay, I'm fed up with this. So I took the whole lock assembly out of the door, and I went to a lock shop, and I said, hey, here's a problem. I put this key, I get it made, you guys make it, it works really good, and then 6 months later, it don't work at all. So the guy says, I know exactly what the problem is. He said, the clearances on the pins is minimal. So when the key wears down just a little bit and no longer works, they make these things in mass production. So they put them together, and they didn't allow enough tolerance for wear on a key. Come on, the key's made of brass, it's soft metal, it wears down, right? So you should get a longer period of time out of it. So I'm glad you brought the lock in. I'm going to tear it apart. I'm going to put new pins in it with a little more range. I'm going to drill it out. So you're going to have more tolerance in there, because it's just the pattern gets you stuck, and it has a very small range. And my head is clicking. Oh, I get it. The range is going to run a repeated pattern, but we can fix that, at least with a lock, for a repeated pattern. So I wonder if a human could fix that if you had a pattern. Now, I grew up and I left. I didn't know if my cousin still had that pattern. But then, and I don't go out of my way to communicate. And then years later, I found out that my cousin was an abused wife. She was married. She was beaten. She had these problems. She had health problems. She had cancer. She had this. She had that. If you look at her lifetime, she had a lifetime of defense, total defense. Last time I saw her, I said, "How's life?" And she said, "Really good." I got this really, after my last husband died, she had a multitude of them, and he was kind of a derelict and whatever. But she says, after he died, I sold the place. I had enough money. I rented a little apartment. It's really kind of small, but it's just perfect for me. Everything works great. I love it in there. Everything's working out. But then this winter, the heater went out, so I don't have a heater. So, I'm trying to figure out, where I'm going to get the money to fix the heater. It's kind of like, wow, this is kind of interesting. She's renting it. We just call the landlord and say, "Hey, the heater quit working." All right. So I say, well, maybe the landlord needs to be notified and you just fix it. Well, then he might raise my rent. I can't afford to have my rent raised because, it's just within my budget. And it's like, wow. See, that's a defensive maneuver still in her body. Maybe not a right hip. That's too much of an assumption to think of, but she had a lifetime of defensive maneuvers. Wow. Come on. It's absurd to think, yes, that little pin zap when putting a diaper calls that. I don't think that calls that. Maybe her alcoholic mother had some influence on it. Maybe the fact that relationships changed pretty frequently. Maybe the fact that she moved around a lot. Maybe there's a whole load of. I can make a long list, but there's no evidence for any of it, right? So there's just assumptions. So we start to look at that, and I start. It drove me into the field of psychology. Drove me into looking at unconscious and subconscious patterns. I had to take a look at what that means. So the Chris Lemmon version. I could quote books. I could tell you ideas. I could tell you differences. I've been doing this for a long time, and at some point in time, the best we have is an educated guess, right? So I give you kind of like what 80 years of an educated guess comes, right? I think those unconscious patterns sit there, only have movement in it. Remember, I touched her and she moved. They're defensive patterns for movement because we're really slow learners, right? Come on, I have had horses. When a horse drops and it got a new cub, a new colt is born, it doesn't take very long to get them up on their feet and moving around. Animals learn really, really fast. I can remember my kids brought home some bear cubs one time. It's like, oh my gosh, Mama Bear is going to really be pissed. We had to take them and I had to clean them up and get the human smell off of them, and then take them back out to find mom, and then set them down somewhere, and then let mom come over and rescue her pups. And to make that all friendly piece, I had to put some food that she would eat down there with the cubs so that she would pick up the smell of the food and would distract her from the fact that we handled her cubs, or she might have got all pissy and killed them. You get this? Is like, God, his patterns are profound in animals, and they're profound in us. Maybe not as profound, but they most certainly are. So I'm looking at someone's life that didn't work out real good, generally speaking. And I could tell you millions of stories because I've had millions of people come to me and it's like, holy cow, this is just really scary. Those patterns in psychology books, I've had a few writers, I don't remember who they were, they would call that the Tower of Babylon. There'd be an unconscious pattern movement in there that would just have movement. And then above that, they'd have what they call subconscious. Subconscious, in my definition, is the same thing, only with a story instead of a movement. So they would stack up. it would stack up and stack up and stack up. So you have all these things that have various different levels of discernment, going all the way down to an unconscious piece. The unconscious piece is just movement. All the rest have stories in them, right? So maybe in life, all of a sudden you remember a story, remember you being, I remember Louis Boswick, the Berkeley Psychic Institute, he told a story one time that displays this pretty good. He said he was in a library in school, in a library doing homework, and somebody was looking for a book. He had it on a stack of books. And somebody came over and said to him, "Are you using that book?" He goes, "No, no." And he picked it up and he went to hand it to him. He had a habit of never putting his arm out straight. He'd always just bend it a little bit. He didn't know where that habit came from, but it was something that he had noticed. So here he was. He goes to reach out across the table to hand a book to someone. They were reaching as far as they can. He had to extend the arm. When he extended his arm out, there was a picture of a dog coming for him. At that moment, he remembered being bitten by a dog. When he reached through a fence to pet a dog, the dog turned and bit him. Okay, so from that day forward, he never extended his arm out. That's the story he shared. Until that day. And that day when he did, it was like he started sweating. He's sitting there. He's totally in fear. And nobody noticed it's in a library or whatever. And the people got their book. They're off looking at the book for whatever they're doing. And he's doing homework. But now he's all angst. He's all wired up. He literally gets his homework and his books, and he's got to go walk around the block for the next half hour to get the energy out of his body from the fear that it lit up. Did it finally dissipate? Yeah, it dissipated. So in life, he decided to put together some type of a program, which became the Berkeley Psychic Institute, so he could kind of work through those subconscious pieces. The subconscious pieces were pieces with stories. So when you would get a quote unquote healing through their protocols, you would then remember a story. You would have something come up, blah, blah, blah. I found out this, my mother never really liked me anyhow, whatever that story was. And we've all heard those from psychologists working with people who are doing the same thing, right? But there's another level, and that is the level of the unconscious that sits down below them. So how do they map out? And how does this affect teaching? And why do people have such a hard time learning relationship between phenomena and information? And how do they secure in the information and not into phenomena? And those are the big questions. So in the first place, we have experiences way before age 6, most of them before age 3. What I get from textbooks is that you might have, as a baby, have a movement experience maybe every couple of minutes. Sometimes just a wisp of air or noise might affect you. We've all been in crowds. We've been to Disneyland or someplace, and kids are screaming and hollering, and you wonder why, and other kids are giggling and having a happy time, and you wonder why, and what is going on, and what's triggering those. And they're like, hell, nobody knows. The mothers don't know. They're trying to rock them and feed them and do whatever with them, get them to shut up. In churches, I've been to movie theaters where they have a crying room. That seemed like a good idea when I had kids, but then I found if you take your kid into the crying room, every kid in there is crying. You can't hear the movie. I learned then take my kid into the movie theater and sit there in a chair and just rock her a little bit while I'm watching the movie. Pretty soon she's asleep. There's no noise, and she does just fine. And so my wife and I at the time used to take our kid to the movies once a week and sit there and I would sit there and kind of rock her a little bit in the chair, and she was quiet. No problem. She would look at the big screen and kind of googie, and then she would just go to sleep, because after a little while, all that disturbance just became boring, right? Didn't make any sense. It was just boring. That's all. She went to sleep. So you start to get a sense of how the mechanism works. People come into class and you're getting them to understand a concept that is not in the structured world. So we've been inundated with a structured world. We live in a structured world. Our language is structured world. Our thinking is structured world. So we think about things, we label things, and we identify them in the structured world. We then produce preferences. I feel safe. I feel safe in these contexts. Oh my goodness, if I'm on a bus with a person of color or a gay person or somebody with multicolored hair, oh my gosh, I'm intimidated. I'm scared. It's like, oh, they're criminals. I know that. I read that in the paper. They're bad people. They're whatever. And then that lights up those patterns of movement and you just want to get away from them. And you want to hate them. Okay. As a group, evolution takes the big chunks, breaks it down to smaller pieces. What used to be a foot then becomes 12 inches, eventually becomes 24 half inches, and so on and so forth. The advantage to that is that we don't need so much waste. It used to be we can still go down and buy 1 foot of pipe threaded on both ends cheaper than you can buy 11 inches and have it threaded. It's going to cost me twice as much to buy 11 inches of pipe threaded on both ends than 12 inches. But it's a question of evolving. Eventually, you're just going to be able to go online and order 11 and a half inches of pipe threaded on both ends, and they'll deliver it to you in 2 days, and it'll cost the same, and it won't be the standard of 12 inch, and you got to adjust. It'll all develop in that direction of having things more accommodating and custom to you as an individual rather than to you as a member of a tribe, a culture, a club, whatever, right? You get this? That's development. The purpose development is to do away with all those biases. The biases come in because when we were tribal people living out there, we had to know who to trust and who not to trust, who was going to be on our side and who wasn't. And now we're global people. And eventually, with climate change and everything else, it's like we start to realize that there is nothing I personally can do. It's too big a piece. We as a nation have to come together. As a globe, we have to come together to resolve this problem. If we don't do that, will we survive through it? Well, some of us will, some of us won't. Like a war. How many people die in a war? How many people die in climate change? Is there a record of climate differences in the past? Yes. Is there a record of large deaths from it? Yes. I know there's a whole genre of people that said, oh, there's no climate change because we've survived it before. Yes, we have survived it before. But before, we could all pack up and move north or move somewhere to get away from it. If the forest is on fire, we could just pack our stuff, get on a horse, and ride 100 miles down the road and get away from the smoke. But right now, we own a house, own a city, we have a job, we have a community, we have relatives, we have friends. We can't do that. Well, we could, but we don't want to. We're probably wise to do that, but then everybody would have to do that. And that becomes a problem. And we saw that in Maui, right? It's like, how the hell do you get out? Where do you go when you're isolated, when there's one road in and out? Where do we go with that? So there's always a threat level in here. So when you're teaching someone a new concepts are not, we take the old thing out, throw it away, and put something new in it. It don't work that way. What we do is we take the old piece that sits in here, and for everybody, it's a little different. It's not the same, not universal. And then we take a new concept. So the difference between the new concept and what's already secured in there is what they have to get. Now, you as a teacher don't know what that is. So you have to really attend to them. And you said, here's the new concept. Attach it to your old concept. Well, if their old concept is different for every student, you're going to have to repeat that teaching a lot of times, right? So when I was a teacher, I liked to do 3-hour classes. I would sit there and I'd look and I'd see, okay, I just presented an idea and I see the light go on. We call that level 2 learning. They just integrate it. I'm not giving them a rule book, like, no skateboarding on the sidewalk downtown. No, it's not a rule book. It's like, why should you not skateboard downtown? Because you're going faster than people can walk. So therefore, you're intimidating people who are, number one, totally unconscious, wandering down the street, going from point A to point B, and don't even remember going anywhere. And luckily, they're going to see the streetlights. Those are a problem. Their unconsciousness is a problem, and their lack of mobility because they're old or something is also a problem, or they're handicapped, or their state of balance because of disease, or because of intoxication, or because of drugs, or because of crap food they're eating, is throwing them out of whack. So you're moving too fast for them. You have to be separated to make it safe. Kids don't like the no skateboarding signs. I got it. I tried skateboarding, got hurt a lot, never got very good at it. I was probably better that I gave my skateboard away before I really broke something. But I was destroying shoulder pads, elbow pads, knee pads. I was tearing them up. I was shredding them. I'd go out and buy another $100 worth of pads so I could protect myself, and busted 4 helmets. I decided maybe I just take my kids to a skateboard park and say, you guys do this, and his old man's not going to play with you. Because I just, maybe if I could have put as much time into it as they had, maybe. But I doubt it, really. It's like older body, doesn't react as fast. Maybe not. And then on the other end, I have seen people that were skateboarders that were winning championships that were like 30, 40 years old, for heaven's sakes. I met one in Carlsbad. He's got $1 million home, and he's a skateboarder. It's like, really? Holy shoot. And he's not young, like, wow. Yeah, maybe I should have stayed with it. I could have made a living, or maybe at best a broken arm, or concussion, or whatever. So there's always a dance between the mechanism that's designed to keep you safe, because we didn't get a manual with this body. We had to figure it all out. We had a few people hopefully helping you figure it out. My family did pretty good, but I have sat with a lot of people whose family did not do very good. And they were really a mess, because those safety markers were way too extreme. They were frightened of everything. After the earthquake in San Francisco, I was there during the earthquake, way back when the big one hit, 8, 5, 9, whatever it was. Pieces of buildings were falling down. I was driving a 14-foot delivery truck. I was parked at a parking meter, truck meter, but a parking spot. And when the earthquake hit, my truck moved up on the sidewalk. It moved 6 feet to the right and 2 feet forward. I had to drive down the sidewalk and off at the crosswalk to get off, because I couldn't get it sideways, right? So it was a huge chunk. And I'm driving around San Francisco with all the lights blinking and traffic going everywhere crazy, trying to train a new driver to make deliveries. And finally, I would find lots of customers who were closing down because the power was out and they were closing their stores. And it's like, no sense in making deliveries. So my driver and I am going, well, dude, his car's at my house. So I said, let's go back home, which was a little intimidating. Some roads were closed, some because of bridges, and it was like, but I knew my way around. So I just were able to maneuver and got all the way down to my house. And when I got to my house, I went into my girlfriend and her kid, and I said, hey, we're going to go get something to eat. You want to go? And she says, well, I'm not going out anywhere. The earthquake's over. It was like hours ago. I'm not going out anywhere. Do you want me to bring you something back? No, I'm fine. Wow, totally defensive. Yeah, I'm going to have to rethink this relationship. So I'm looking at this guy and I said, you might run into the same thing I do if you go home. So why don't you and I go get something to eat? I'll buy you dinner and we'll go find someplace. We found an Italian restaurant. The power was out. but the guy had gas stoves. So I looked at it. It was there. There was a lot of cars parked. I parked. We went in. They had all candle lights at the table. It was cute. It was an Italian restaurant. It all kind of went to the theme because the power was out. So in the kitchen, they had emergency generators sitting out, and they had floodlights in the kitchen so the cook could see. The gas fire was working, so he could cook. That was not a problem. And they had everything sitting on a burner, all pots sitting on a burner, the grill, everything was there. And he said, when we went in, he said, my menu's a little limited tonight because my kitchen's at half efficiency because power's out. So what I've done is I put them on a whiteboard here. These are not the specials. These are all I can easily make. So pick whatever you want, and whatever the price is right there is discounted. And it's discounted to be able to say thank you in this condition for you to come in because we all have to stay alive. So I said, cool, great. So we sat down and we had a nice dinner. We spent about an hour and a half there. We had dessert, we had wine, we had everything else. I just wanted to get my trainee calmed down and relaxed so that when he goes home to his wife, he doesn't want to run in to the same thing I ran in with my girlfriends. And when I get home, she was like, and literally I went in, took a shower and went to bed, and she was up all night. It's like when I got up in the morning, she was still sitting out there in front of her computer looking at the pictures of the earthquake. And she said, what do you think is going to happen? I said, I think I'm going to go get in my truck and go pick up my trainee and go to Starbucks and have a cup of coffee, hoping one of them is going to be open. I'm going to go to work. I said, you're going back into the city? I go, wow. I don't know if I can answer that question. Of course I'm going back into the city. What would I do? Right? How many, and I'm looking at her and I realize she can't help this. It's not because she's dumb. She was not dumb. She has got a lot of degrees. She was in education and a level of supervision. She was a very bright lady. No doubt in my mind. It's just that she was totally in fear. Like, wow, nothing I can say, right? So I go talk to her son. I said, hey, kid, you all right? And he said, Mom said I should stay home today. I said, okay, if that's what you guys decide. I didn't ask what Mom said. I said, how are you? I'm fine. What would you rather do? I'd rather go to school. Okay. So why don't you, when I leave, why don't you tell her you talk to me and you'd rather go to school? And you can go to school 6 blocks from here. You don't need her taking you. You can walk. You're a big kid. You're in high school. Go. So ask her first. See what she says. So he actually got permission and went to school. She stayed home. She stayed home for 2 weeks. Called in sick. Stayed home for 2 weeks to get over that. So these are these patterns that set up. Did I have some techniques to work on them at the time? Yeah, but she didn't want to work on them. She didn't even want to talk to me. It's like, no, you just want to discount this. No one. Okay. We're not going to talk for a while. Take a break here. Time out. I'm just going to function, and I will ask you, do you want something to eat? I'd be glad to cook you something. If you don't want something to eat, you want to sit there and stare at the television with last week's pictures of the crisis that I was somewhere in the middle of and didn't give a shit about. And it's like, okay, whatever. Those are the elements that come into play. So what gets stacked on is her childhood had probably more crisis in it than my childhood did. More of those subconscious or unconscious patterns, or maybe because she went through a couple of relationships, maybe a lot of subconscious patterns. I don't know. It's like I didn't know her that long, right? I had a lot of relationships that didn't always last that long. It's like it was all a learning experience. And so here I am in a learning experience. I go, well, this is kind of cool. So I'm picking up my driver and we're going back into the city, And his wife has told him, I don't want you to go. And he goes, well, I need a job, so I'm going to have to. This guy wants to go, so we're going to go, And we went back to the city and we went around and we serviced stores and we went and we talked to people and blah, 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 blah. And some of the stores were still closed. Some of them were open. We had to go back and catch some of the ones that we didn't get the day before. I'll find it good. Not a problem. By the time we were done, we were headed home. I said, why don't you call your wife and see if she would like to meet us? I'll go halfway to your house and she's got a car. She can come over. You have no kids. She could come over and meet us for dinner. I'll buy you guys dinner. I'm trying to make up to the family for any tragedy. And I said, and I will call my girlfriend and her son and see if they want to come to dinner. No, she said absolutely no. And she's hung up on me. I was like, but I took him and his wife out to dinner. She had calmed down a little bit and she wanted to know if it was safe out there. And I said, no, it's absolutely never, ever, ever been safe out there. Never. It's never going to be safe out there. Not at all. But we learn from experience and we manage. So two things happen to those patterns. We have an experience. It lights up that patterness. Lights up means that the pattern is located. It's remembered, which means energy finds it and lights it up. It's like a computer network. It integrates, it goes in and it finds a piece of data. You type something in and it finds it, it brings it up. And so it brings it up and there it is. There's the file. And then you could update the file and fix it. Right now I'm working on updating files and fixing them for another webinar that I'm doing on a different site and updating something. And that most certainly can happen. Or the opposite could happen. We could deceive ourselves and say, what really happened is not true. What really happened is what's in the memory. And that didn't happen. Wow. So when there's an earthquake and an hour away where my girlfriend is living and I'm living, there's no problem. There's no falling down buildings. There's no power out. There's no nothing, right? Traffic, because a lot of things got rerouted going to the city, but other than that, no nothing. So there's no logical piece for her to be X for 2 weeks. But also I would be in big trouble if I tried to talk her out of it. So I just got to respect her process and let her process it until we're ready. And I said, when a weekend comes up and you want to go celebrate your survival, we'll go somewhere, not San Francisco. We'll go along the coast somewhere so that you can, maybe we'll go down to Carmel or something and go to dinner or something, where it's farther away from the earthquake and maybe safer. And so she finally agreed to an opportunity to dress up and go out for a nice dinner somewhere, and that calmed her down and supported the whole process, and it gave her son a delightful time because he got to spend a night with a friend of his and be away from her angst, and then it all calmed down. So this is just the matrix of what goes on normally in life with people. We already have a bunch of data from our experience for 6 years. Billions of little snippets we have in there. We get another piece of information, and it doesn't take it all as a chunk. It takes the difference between this, and it sticks it on top and attaches it. And these stairs step up and stairs step up and stairs step up. So when you're teaching a class, you have to repeat it, and you have to repeat it in a little different vibration, a little different energy set, a little different story context, a little different reference, so that the students can get the size chunk that'll fit on theirs. They won't completely understand the concept totally. So we have what I call I don't call it, but somebody called it, and I'm just using it. Level 1, level 2, level 3 learning. So level 1 learning is like, what do I need to do? It's kind of like you get directions to assemble something, and it tells you step by step what to do, and you put it together, right? Okay, that's level 1 learning. Level 2 learning is like, you get something, you go, oh, I know how to do this. Like something from IKEA. It's like, oh, I got this, whatever. You throw it all out and you put it all together. And then, and somewhere in the whole process, you double check the directions, which are not written in language. IKEA is smart. They didn't want to make 50,000 copies to reflect all the languages and countries they sell products in. So they just put pictures in there, no words. And that's wise, really very wise. And I have bought a lot of things from IKEA. Their pictures aren't always correct, by the way. So angles and stuff are wrong. I've made discernments on them, and I've got a file folder of actually 4 different sets of directions that were wrong. And I sent that in a nice letter, photocopied it and sent it to IKEA and saying, hey, you guys, fix your directions. This is not the picture you took, what you drew there, whoever was drawing it. Come on. I also have taken a lot of drafting classes. So I can get this. They didn't draft it correctly. They didn't draw the picture correctly. They had it all twisted or backwards, this end, that end. It don't work that way. So I sent notices in, and every time I do that, I get a little coupon for $10 off or $20 off from IKEA saying, thank you very much for pointing something out. I don't know if they ever fix it or not, because I never went back and bought the same thing again. But anyway, it's just the act of recognizing that little piece we're putting on top might have got convoluted, but because some of the information might have got lost here to comply with this that maybe is bigger. All right. There's a lot of things that go on when data transfers, because we don't drop everything and learn something new. Everything gets adapted to what we learn. It all stacks up. It stacks up. It stacks up. So you can see why when we have to deal with old people like me, it's kind of like, holy cow. They're like, some old people don't get it, right? I looked at my stepfather who died in 97, and he did get a computer. He couldn't quite get email running most of the time for an entire year. Or you would send him an email and sometimes he'd get it, and then later on in the year. So he'd have to have the grandkids come over and fix their computer. But before he died, I think he got to the point where I could send him an email or even call him on the phone and be able to get hold of him. And that was like a big change, because for a long time, it's like, it was really hard to communicate with him. So he had done some adapting, but he was really kind of a bright person. He did adapting, right? So he could understand some of the changes, but a small amount. A 10 or 12-year-old kid, grandkids, could come in and just fix the whole thing for whatever he clicked on, whatever he did, just locked it all up, and they could come in and fix it in a matter of 15, 20 minutes and set it all up for them. And even a couple of them came in and rerouted things and made it simpler and took a lot of stuff off of a lot of the options off his screen, so he wouldn't accidentally click on the wrong icon, right? So it made it simpler. They were very, very smart simplifying it for this old guy. But why didn't an old guy with a very bright and a high IQ couldn't pick this up? Because he didn't have a base to put it on. So as we move forward into our present evolutionary change, in the first part of the evolutionary change that we got into from 50 to 2020, what those were familiar pieces were just fixed. But given women's rights in the 70s, giving minority rights, now working with this woke world and all these other ideas, it's kind of like, yeah, it's an oversaturation. It kind of like, really, it's like, okay, but I get it. Because of the inherent piece I have, maybe it's not that small. I've already interfaced with a lot of those, but there are other people that got a really small piece and they're so well defended. They got to hear this, I don't know how many times before they can add on a piece where they feel that they can amend or adapt or change or put a different twist to the story, so that it's not like those are the bad guys. I'm not going to even bother you with millions of stories about how dysfunctional that whole system is, because I would lay you odds every one of you out there knows how dysfunctional it is and how damaging it is, and so many people have been injured, hurt, and judged and evaluated because of somebody's bias. Unbelievable, right? Totally unbelievable. I'm not into being able to fix that problem. I'm into saying, how do I teach someone to think differently when that chunk they're carrying around is all first level learning? Like 2 + 2 is 4. All the things that we learn, they can spell every word in a dictionary, but they don't understand the difference between meanings of similar words and where they would use them and where they wouldn't. And they then don't get to put a sentence structure together and new ideas together and have a big enough range to see how that would play out. That's a really scary piece. So when you walk in the door to my center, or to most people for learning, they got a problem. They're not learning. They got a problem. They're not learning. That piece is compressed. It's defended. It really is tremendously. And we need to open it up. And so it takes a teacher, when I work with them, about 2 years. And after about 2 years, they can start to make that discernment. I have an idea how to open this person up. I have an idea how to frame an idea, a useful piece that we might get a clue to in a phenomena, and how to take that piece and strip off the fabricated stories, because it's all imagined, so it should have fabricated pieces in it. How do we tailor it down so it fits in a slot over here, so we can apply that? And even when we do that, first example comes to mind. The doctor that was working in a hospital eons ago that looked around and said, why do so many patients die? And he's thinking, when doctors aren't working on surgeons, aren't working on patients, they go down to the basement and work in cadavers, trying to learn more about how bodies are put together. They don't wash their hands. So he's thinking, maybe we should wash hands before we work on a patient. Maybe not so many would die. They ridiculed him. They actually drove him out of the business. He wound up with an institution when he died. And he died from an infection, from just exactly that. Not somebody. It took over 60 years to implement the idea that doctors should wash their hands when they're working on a cadaver. And I'm working, now today, most surgeons aren't down in the basement working on cadavers. They do that in school. So it's not as bad today, but nonetheless, they still could be working with somebody, and then they've got a new client. They always come in and wash their hands, and most certainly make a show of doing that. So you can see that they're gearing themselves up out of a respect for you, which is what they're trying to do. I'm bringing the skill set and the attention into care. Those are pieces that had to be added to that. It took time. It takes time. And that's why evolution takes so long. When new ideas come into play, it takes time. Small fragments get integrated. I can say the same thing to a class with 20 people, and if I have them report back from their experience, I don't even recognize half of it. I have no idea what they're talking about. So it's an opportunity for me to learn how to frame things differently. It's an opportunity for me to see how to frame the next class or the next lesson for them uniquely, because the way that they interpret it. I don't know if I could ever sit down and make all those discernments and write that into a book. I would have one hell of an encyclopedia, and it would be totally useless, because it would be so massive that, it's like all these cameras they have in banks and stuff. And boy, someone comes in to rob a bank and they got their picture, and like, yeah, it's great, but what did that picture mean? They got a picture of somebody, and that means that that person falls in the category of like 11.6 million people. It's like, oh my gosh, it's not like we got a database on that person. We got a database that includes those 21 or 22 reference points on facial recognition, and we go into the database and we pick up all these people, and then we got to run around and send cops out all over the United States trying to interview people to see where the hell they're at. So if they have an alibi for not being there, because they're kind of a minimalist suspect because of the fact that they look like the bad guy. If they just put marshmallows in their cheek and push their cheeks up like this when they're robbing a bank, they would probably never come up on facial recognition. It's like, it's pretty sad. Is the data being useful? It's being more successful, I think, in other countries. I think that they probably went into more reference points, or they were able to find better factors of determination. We really have not enough factors of determination. And then we go to minority groups, we have even less factors of determination. So when you have an Asian American or a Black person commit a crime, it's like, oh my gosh, the amount of millions and millions of like-minded people come out of that piece is like, whoa, we got to sit down and we got to rethink this. Or rather than rethink it, we just started abandoning it because it wasn't a reliable piece of data, right? And so, we were supposed to be pulling this facial recognition program out. San Francisco County, city outlawed it all. They was the first one to do that. CIA was taken out of the picture, saying, don't do that anymore. And then we could get into the story of like, when we couldn't do his investigation anymore, then we could do it voluntarily and send our picture into social media sites, and then we could get the data to a social media site. So they got it anyhow. Now they get all your information, not from cameras hidden somewhere, but from you giving it to them. And they go get to take all those pictures. I'm not making a conspiracy thing. I'm telling you that was a wise move. It was cheaper. It was wise. And is that database being useful for someone? Well, I think I have seen a lot of different uses for that. That's been really good. I was in search and rescue once, and I would find people injured, get reports of someone laying in the bottom of the canyon. We go down there and bring them up, and I got a body there with no ID on it. They're wearing a pair of gym trunks. They decided to jump into a creek that was only 3 inches deep, and they killed themselves smashed themselves because they were too dumb to realize it was only 3 inches deep, and they dropped off a 100-foot drop. Totally crazy. And we're dragging the body out, and we try to identify it. And it's like, guys, it's really tough. We got to go in, and if they hit head first into there, then it's really hard to even get teeth identification. I have closed cases after a couple of years. It's just like, we got a dead person, we can't even identify them. That just happens a lot. So there is a positive use for all this stuff. I just want you to understand, in this teaching, we're trying to get people to be able to entertain concepts. The difference between what they know and what they have has to get integrated on top of it. And sharing some of the positive stories gets them to take an interest and make this attachment less defensive, because the bottom part's going to be defensive, and a little more open to potential. And those are the criterions you have to put into this as a teacher to make people open up to it, to make people overcome those pieces of having it be, oh, we're going to all live here in a community and believe what we believe, and we're going to cast out everyone else. Boy, that doesn't work. I would like to think, and I do think, that we're moving towards a global people. I don't see that happening in my lifetime, maybe a few thousand years. But we're moving in a direction towards it. We haven't been on this planet very long. We're relatively new compared to everything else. Just like, and you look at evolution, we've only been here for a few seconds. So we're just evolving, coming into the game. And I'm not too sure how stable Earth is going to be moving forward. I'm not sure that we've got billions of years going forward for a human race to develop. I think most certainly we'll become a global people, and the next step of becoming a global people will be together enough to where we can go out and find other opportunities, I would think. I'm not sure that I'm going to sign up to go to Mars. Well, as a matter of fact, I already know I'm not going to sign up to Mars, but none of that would be relevant because I'm going to let some 80-year-old old codger go along anyhow. But most certainly, I think eventually we'll start to see where we're going to have to build a relationship, not with just planet Earth, but build a relationship with this piece of the universe that we have some information about. You've got to remember that we have a lot of information about 5%. In other words, we have a lot of data about only 5% of the universe we live in. All the rest is dark energy and dark matter we don't know anything about. So if you only knew 5% about food, you wouldn't have a lot of recipes with much diversity in them, right? So we got a little ways to go, folks. We really do. So it's like, so we're learning, and we're learning fast. And the idea of the programs was to support that. We need to get away from yesterday's news, embrace what's coming down, and look at it, analyze it, determine where value is for it so that we can mark a path for us forward to squeeze the value out of it, and not to be sitting in a bar saying, I hate these people. This really pisses me off. I'm going to do a video. I'm going to get even. I'm going to go blow up something. I'm going to shoot someone. I'm going to, gosh, it's just like, that doesn't accomplish anything. So we have to get a group of people together, help your community out a little bit. You know, we don't have to have a natural disaster to help out the neighbors. There is disasters in every neighborhood. You know, I see people, the tree falls down. I go over and say, hey, I don't have a chainsaw, but I got some tools. You need some help with that. And, you know, some people say, yeah, you know, and other people say, now I'm going to call someone. I got insurance. I said, okay, fine, whatever. My neighbor lady, the wind blew her fence down. She didn't have insurance. I was leaving town. I'm backing on my driveway to go on a trip for a month. And I look over and I see her fence down. I'm going, wow, I really felt bad. It's like I said to my wife, should I go? It's 7:00 in the morning. Should I go knock on her door and tell her I'm going to be gone for a month? I get back, I'll help her. And my wife said, she's not even going to be awake. Don't bother. Someone will help her. Look, some stranger down the street came over, fixed that whole thing, rebuilt her fence, put that whole thing back up. I don't know how much she contributed to the cost, but he did all the work. He just volunteered. He just lives in the neighborhood. It's like exactly what I would have done. Just like I was just leaving. I'm glad that there's another person in the neighborhood. So when I came back, he had done part of the fence. It was up. Another part of it was up, but it was a little shaky. I went back and told her, I'm going to finish out the fence and reinforce it a little bit so the next windstorm doesn't take it off. And that's what we did. You know, she lives in that house and she's only got so many resources available to her. So we help out where we can. Those are the pieces we need to bring to the table. How can I help you? How can I enrich your life? How can I make those changes? How can I build on that pattern of defense where there's a camaraderie, a friendship, not from a club, not because you think like me or act like me or look like me, but because we're humans and we're in this game together. We need to enrich this so we can get along. So yes, I know I'm preaching to the choir and I'm going to shut up at this point, but you get the undercurrent, what I call second level learning. You got to blend this all together because people are a lot more different in their thinking than you ever begin to realize. That unconscious pieces make separation and it acts. And there's no stories, no dialogue, nothing comes up out of the unconscious. Subconscious at least has a little story. Oh, I fell out of the tree. And ever since then, I've been, or like I told you with Louis Boswick, he had an unconscious picture because he realized that if he put his arm out straight, the memory would come back to him of the dog attacking him. So he defended. until he had to come out straight, and then he got rid of the picture, and then he had freedom of movement. We need to get to freedom of movement. It doesn't have to be a big trauma, and we need to do it in a gentle sort of way. Psychology is working on it. They have a hard time, like everyone else right now, coming to the same page, different ideas. I'm sure there are a lot of psychologists that'll say, this guy don't know what he's talking about to me. I'm just showing you what I got from experience, and I use these experiences as an offer to teach and to be able to bring potential into people's lives. All right. So any questions about any of this, why go ahead and email me. It's Chris, that's with 2 S's, CHRISS at wizardscats.com. That is my website. WizardsCats is a channel this YouTube is on. And it's been really fun talking. And it'll be interesting to see what I come up with next month. All right. So thank you very much.